The soldier who returned from war, only to face high school. Marcus Chen stared at the brick facade of Westfield High School, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the straps of his backpack. 3 years ago, he had been just another 17-year-old student walking through these same doors, worried about algebra tests and asking Sarah Martinez to prom. Now at 20, he was a decorated veteran of the Kepler War, humanity's first interstellar conflict, and somehow he found returning to high school more terrifying than facing down Zephyrian plasma cannons. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where teenagers laughed and shouted to each other, their voices carrying that carefree energy Marcus remembered but could no longer feel. His enhanced hearing, a side effect of the military neural implants, picked up every conversation, every footstep, every locker slamming shut. The cacophony was overwhelming after months of careful rehabilitation designed to help veterans readjust to civilian life. "Just breathe," he whispered to himself, using the same mantra that had kept him alive during the siege of Kepler 442b. One step at a time, the Terran Federation's veteran education program required all soldiers who enlisted before completing their education to finish high school upon their return. It was supposed to help with reintegration, but Marcus suspected it was more about politics than genuine care for veterans. The program made for good headlines. Heroes returned to hit the books instead of the battlefield. As he walked toward the main entrance, Marcus noticed how the other students unconsciously moved out of his way. His military bearing was impossible to hide. The perfect posture, the precise movements, the way his eyes constantly scanned for potential threats. Even in civilian clothes, he stood out like a soldier among children, which, he supposed, was exactly what he was. The hallways smelled exactly the same, a mixture of industrial cleaner, teenage anxiety, and that indefinable scent of institutional education. But now Marcus's enhanced senses could detect so much more. The stress pheromones of students worried about upcoming tests, the lingering traces of various substances some kids had experimented with, and underneath it all the clean, sterile smell that reminded him uncomfortably of the medical bays on military transport ships. "Marcus? Marcus Chen." He turned to see Mrs. Rodriguez, his old chemistry teacher, approaching with a mixture of surprise and something that might have been pride. She looked older than he remembered, though only 3 years had passed. The war had a way of making time feel elastic. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, managing a small smile. "Good to see you again." "We heard you enlisted," she said, her voice careful. "We're so proud of you for serving, and for coming back safely." Marcus nodded, though safely felt like a relative term. Physically, yes, he had returned with all his limbs and organs intact. Mentally and emotionally, he was still working on that part. The weekly therapy sessions helped, but there were some things that civilian counselors simply couldn't understand, no matter how well trained they were. "I need to finish my diploma," he explained. "The program requires it." Of course. Principal Hayes will want to see you, I'm sure. And Marcus?" She paused, seeming to struggle with what to say. "If you need anything at all, my door is always open." The offer was kind, but Marcus could see the uncertainty in her eyes. How do you relate to a student who has seen things that most adults never would? How do you help someone readjust to worrying about homework when they've spent the last 3 years worried about survival? His first class was advanced placement history, a cruel irony since Marcus had just lived through what would undoubtedly become a major chapter in future textbooks. The teacher, Mr. Jameson, was discussing the causes of World War I when Marcus walked in. 20 pairs of teenage eyes turned to stare at him and the room fell silent. "Class, we have a new student joining us," Mr. Jameson said, though he looked as uncertain as Mrs. Rodriguez had. "This is Marcus Chen." "Actually," Marcus said quietly, "I'm not new. I was a student here 3 years ago. I'm just finishing up." A girl in the front row, Marcus didn't recognize her, so she must have been a freshman when he left, raised her hand tentatively. "Were you really in the war? Like the space war?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a plasma blast. Marcus felt every eye in the room fixed on him, and for a moment he was back on Kepler 442b, pinned down by enemy fire while his squad leader bled out next to him. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. "Yes," he said simply. "Did you kill any aliens?" Another student asked, and Marcus noticed Mr. Jameson wince at the bluntness of the question. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. The honest truth was complicated. Yes, he had killed Zephyrians, but they weren't monsters. They were soldiers, just like him, fighting for what they believed was right. The war had started over mining rights to a system both species claimed, escalated by politicians and corporate interests while young people from both sides died in the vacuum of space. I did my job, he said finally, and so did they. The rest of the class passed in uncomfortable silence, with Mr. Jameson attempting to return to his lesson on historical warfare, while Marcus sat in the back, trying to focus on discussions of trench warfare and poison gas when his experience involved energy weapons and zero-gravity combat. Between classes, Marcus found himself at his old locker, surprised that he still remembered the combination. Inside, he discovered a few items he had left behind. An old notebook, a photo of friends he hadn't spoken to in years, a ticket stub from a movie he barely remembered enjoying. Artifacts from a different life, a different person. Holy shit, Marcus Chen. He turned to see Jake Morrison, who had been his best friend before the war. Jake looked exactly the same, still the lanky teenager Marcus remembered, though now he was a senior while Marcus was, a 20-year-old junior? A veteran trying to play student? The categories no longer seemed to fit. Hey Jake, Marcus said, closing his locker. Dude, we heard you joined the military, but nobody knew for sure. And now you're back?
This is insane!
Jake's enthusiasm was genuine, but somehow exhausting. You have to tell me everything. What was it like out there?
Did you really fight aliens?
Oh man, Sarah's going to flip when she sees you. At the mention of Sarah, Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Sarah Martinez, whom he had been too shy to ask to prom, who had been the subject of countless teenage daydreams. The girl he had thought about during long watches on patrol ships, wondering if she might wait for him, if she might still care about the boy who had left Westfield High 3 years ago. She's still here? Marcus asked. Senior year, same as me. She's different now. We all are, I guess. But Marcus, you look... Jake paused, studying his old friend's face. You look older. Like really older. Marcus almost smiled at that. Jake had no idea how much older 3 years of war could make someone feel. In combat, days felt like months, and months felt like years. He had celebrated his 18th, 19th, and 20th birthdays in military barracks on different planets, surrounded by people who understood the weight of what they were doing. The bell rang, signaling the end of the break period, and students began flowing through the hallways toward their next classes. Marcus watched them move, noting the casual way they interacted, the easy laughter, the simple concerns. Part of him envied them their innocence, while another part felt protective of it. As he made his way to his next class, Marcus realized that surviving the war might have been the easy part. At least in combat, he had known who the enemy was and what he was fighting for. Here, in the familiar yet strange environment of his old high school, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. The real battle, he suspected, was just beginning. The soldier who returned from war. Part 2 Marcus's second class was physical education, which turned out to be both a blessing and a curse. Coach Williams, a former Marine himself, recognized something in Marcus's bearing and gave him a respectful nod when he entered the gymnasium. The familiar smell of rubber mats and teenage sweat brought back memories of simpler times, when his biggest physical challenge was trying to climb the rope to the ceiling, rather than scaling the crystalline cliff faces of hostile alien worlds. Chen, right? Coach Williams said, consulting his roster. I heard you served. Kepler campaign? Yes, sir. Marcus replied automatically, his military conditioning taking over. At ease, son. This is gym class, not a parade ground. The coach's voice was gruff but understanding. You comfortable participating in regular activities, or do you need any accommodations? Marcus considered the question. Physically, he was in better shape than he had ever been. The military's enhancement protocols had improved his strength, reflexes, and endurance far beyond baseline human normal. But emotionally, he wasn't sure how he would handle competitive team activities with teenagers who saw sports as games rather than life-or-death scenarios. I'll participate, sir, he said. The class was playing basketball, and Marcus found himself on a team with students he didn't recognize. They were all younger, probably sophomores, which meant they would have been in middle school when he left. To them, he was just another new student, albeit one who moved with unusual precision and had oddly intense eyes. The game started normally enough, but Marcus quickly realized he had a problem. His enhanced reflexes and military training made him devastatingly effective on the court. Every movement his opponents made seemed slow and telegraphed. He could predict their actions seconds before they made them, intercept passes with ease, and his shooting accuracy was near perfect, thanks to hand-eye coordination honed by years of weapons training. After he scored his 15th consecutive point, stealing the ball from increasingly frustrated opponents, Coach Williams called a timeout. "Chen," a word, the coach said, pulling him aside. "You're dominating out there. Is that a problem, sir?" "Not a problem exactly, but—" Coach Williams paused, watching the other students catch their breath and complain about the unfair matchup. "These are kids, son. They're here to have fun and learn teamwork. You're here to— Well, what are you here for?" Marcus looked at the gymnasium full of teenagers sweating and laughing despite their frustration, and realized he didn't have a good answer. What was he here for? To get a piece of paper that said he had finished high school? To prove he could readjust to civilian life? To recapture something he had lost? "I don't know, sir," he admitted. "Tell you what," Coach Williams said. "Why don't you help me coach for the rest of the period? Might be more useful for everyone." Marcus spent the remainder of gym class teaching basic defensive positioning and explaining how to read an opponent's body language to predict their next move. The students were initially skeptical, but when a scrawny sophomore named Danny managed to successfully steal the ball from the team captain using Marcus's techniques, their attitude shifted to genuine interest. "How did you know he was going to drive left?" Danny asked excitedly. "His shoulders," Marcus explained. "People telegraph their intentions with micro-movements. In the military, we call it reading body language, but it applies to sports too. Watch his right shoulder. It dips slightly before he commits to a direction." For the first time since returning to school, Marcus felt useful. These students might not understand warfare, but they could understand the practical application of observation and prediction. It was a small bridge between his two worlds. Lunch period presented new challenges. The cafeteria was a chaos of social hierarchies that Marcus remembered, but no longer felt connected to. He got his food, the same mystery meat and overcooked vegetables he remembered, and looked around for somewhere to sit. Jake Morrison waved him over to a table near the windows where several of Marcus's former classmates had gathered. Among them was Sarah Martinez, looking exactly as beautiful as Marcus remembered, but somehow different in ways he couldn't quite define. "Marcus." Sarah stood up as he approached, and for a moment he thought she might hug him. Instead, she hesitated, seeming uncertain about the appropriate level of physical contact with a returning veteran. "I can't believe you're really here," we all thought. "Well, we weren't sure if you'd make it back." "Surprised me too," Marcus said, managing a smile as he sat down. The conversation was awkward at first, with his old friends unsure how to talk to him. They asked careful questions about the military, avoiding anything that might be too personal or traumatic. In return, they shared updates about their lives, college applications, part-time jobs, relationship drama that seemed simultaneously familiar and impossibly trivial. "Remember when you were worried about asking Sarah to prom?" Jake said, apparently thinking this was a safe topic. "Man, you agonized over that for weeks." Marcus glanced at Sarah, who blushed slightly. "Things seemed simpler then," he said. "They were simpler," Sarah said quietly. "For all of us." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table until it was broken by the arrival of someone Marcus didn't recognize. A large, muscular senior with the kind of aggressive confidence that Marcus associated with people who had never faced real consequences for their actions. "So you're the war hero everyone's talking about," the newcomer said, his tone suggesting that war hero wasn't meant as a compliment. "Brad Hutchins. I'm team captain for football, wrestling, and basically anything that matters around here." Marcus looked up at Brad without standing, taking in the territorial posture and barely concealed hostility. In the military, he would have recognized this as a dominance challenge from someone trying to establish their position in the social hierarchy. In high school, apparently, some things never changed. "Marcus Chen," he replied evenly. "I heard you were showing off in gym class today," Brad continued. "Beating up on sophomores. Real impressive." "I was helping Coach Williams teach defensive techniques," Marcus said, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious provocation. "Right. Teaching." Brad sat down uninvited, his bulk making the table feel smaller. Tell me something, war hero. You ever actually see combat? Or were you one of those rear echelon types who spent the war fixing computers on a space station? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because it was insulting, but because of the memories it triggered. The siege of Kepler 442b. Watching his squad leader die from a plasma burn while enemy forces overran their position. The 3-day running battle through the Crystal Canyons where half his unit was lost. The way Zephyrian blood looked almost black against their silver skin. Marcus's hands resting on the table began to tremble slightly. His enhanced hearing picked up every sound in the cafeteria with painful clarity. And for a moment, the noise of teenagers eating lunch sounded like weapons fire. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, using the techniques his therapist had taught him. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you okay?" When he opened his eyes, everyone at the table was staring at him with expressions ranging from concern to fear. Brad looked particularly unsettled, apparently not having expected such a strong reaction to his casual provocation. "I'm fine," Marcus said, though his voice sounded strange even to himself. "Just tired." "Maybe you should go to the nurse," Jake suggested. "No." Marcus stood up, his movement controlled but clearly indicating the conversation was over. "I need some air." He left the cafeteria without looking back, aware that his abrupt departure would become the subject of immediate speculation and gossip. In the hallway, he found a quiet corner near the trophy case and leaned against the wall, trying to regain his composure. The trophy case was full of awards from years past, state championships in various sports, academic competitions, debate tournaments, evidence of achievement and success in a world where the stakes were measured in points rather than lives. Marcus found himself staring at a particular trophy from 3 years ago, a regional science fair award that he vaguely remembered competing for, back when his biggest worry was getting into a good college. "The flashbacks get easier," a voice said behind him. Marcus turned to see Mr. Peterson, the school janitor who was older than Marcus remembered, and wearing a veteran's cap. Marcus had never really noticed him before, but now he recognized something familiar in the man's eyes. "Vietnam," Mr. Peterson said, touching his cap. "Long time ago, but some things stick with you. Does it really get easier?" Marcus asked. "Not easier, exactly. Different. You learn to manage them, to recognize the triggers before they hit you full force." Mr. Peterson began wiping down nearby lockers, his movements casual but his attention focused on Marcus. "How long you been back?" 6 months out of the service. First day back in school. And some punk kid decided to test you already." It wasn't a question. They always do. They see someone who's been where they haven't, done things they haven't, and they need to prove something to themselves. "I don't want to prove anything," Marcus said. "I just want to finish school and figure out what comes next." "That's good." The Soldier Who Returned from War, Part 3. Marcus's afternoon classes passed in a blur of curious stares and whispered conversations. By the time he reached his final period, advanced literature with Ms. Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, the story of his lunchtime breakdown had spread throughout the school, growing in the telling until he had supposedly either attacked another student or collapsed completely. Ms. Chen was a small, serious woman in her 50s who had taught at Westfield for over 20 years. She looked at Marcus with the same careful assessment he had received from other faculty members, but her expression held more understanding than uncertainty. "Mr. Chen," she said as students filed into the classroom, "I understand you're completing your education after military service. We're currently reading The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I thought you might find it relevant." Marcus nodded, familiar with the book from a literature course he had taken during his military education. O'Brien's stories about Vietnam soldiers had been both enlightening and painful to read, especially the pieces about the weight of memory and the difficulty of translating combat experience into civilian understanding. "For today's discussion," Ms. Chen announced to the class, "I want to explore the concept of story truth versus happening truth that O'Brien presents. The idea that emotional truth sometimes requires changing facts to convey the real experience." A girl in the front row raised her hand. "But isn't that just lying? If something didn't actually happen, how can it be true?" "That's an excellent question, Jessica." Who would like to respond? The room fell silent and Marcus could feel the expectant attention of his classmates. Finally, he raised his hand. Sometimes, he said carefully, the facts don't capture what something actually felt like. If you're trying to help someone understand an experience they've never had, you might need to adjust the details to convey the emotional reality. Can you give us an example? Ms. Chen asked gently. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to share. If I told you that during the siege of Kepler 442b, we held our position for 72 hours under constant enemy fire, those are the facts. But the facts don't tell you what it felt like to watch time stretch until every minute seemed like an hour, or how the sound of plasma fire became a constant background noise that you stopped consciously hearing, but never stopped feeling in your bones. The classroom was completely silent now, with 25 students and one teacher hanging on every word. If I wanted you to understand what that was really like, Marcus continued, I might tell you it lasted a week, or that the sound was so loud it made our ears bleed, or that we didn't sleep for days. None of that would be literally true, but it might be more honest about the actual experience than just saying 72 hours under fire. Ms. Chen nodded slowly. That's a very sophisticated understanding of O'Brien's concept. Have you read his work before? Yes, ma'am. We studied it in a military literature course. It helped some of us understand that we weren't the first people to struggle with coming home. After class, Marcus was gathering his books when Jessica, the girl who had asked about lying, approached his desk. I'm sorry, she said quietly, about what I said. I didn't think about how that might sound to someone who's actually been in a war. No need to apologize, Marcus said. It was a good question. It's important to think critically about truth and fiction. Can I ask you something else? She looked nervous but determined. My brother enlisted last year. He's supposed to deploy to the Centauri system soon. Is it? What should I expect when he comes back? The question caught Marcus off guard. He looked at this 17-year-old girl, worried about her brother, and realized she was asking him to predict her family's future based on his own trauma. It was an impossible question, but also an important one. Every person handles it differently, he said finally. Some adapt quickly, some struggle for years, most fall somewhere in between. The best thing you can do is remember that he might come back changed, and that's okay. The person who comes home might not be exactly the same as the person who left, but he'll still be your brother. Jessica nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Thank you. That helps. As Marcus left the classroom, he reflected on the conversation. For the first time since returning to school, he had felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with his enhanced physical capabilities or military training. He had provided something only he could offer. Perspective from someone who had been where Jessica's brother was going. The hallways were emptying as students headed to after-school activities or went home for the day. Marcus had no particular place to be, so he found himself wandering toward the library, hoping for a quiet place to think about the day's events. The library was nearly empty except for a few students working on homework, and Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, who had been at Westfield since before Marcus was born. She looked up as he entered and smiled warmly. Marcus Chen, my goodness, look at you. All grown up and home from the war. Her voice carried genuine affection without the careful uncertainty he had heard from other teachers. Are you here to study or just hiding from the chaos? A little of both, I think, Marcus said. Well, you're always welcome here. Same rules as before. Respect the books and keep your voice down. She paused, studying his face. You know, we have a section on military history that's been expanded quite a bit since the Kepler conflict started. A lot of interest in contemporary accounts. Marcus nodded politely, though the idea of reading about the war he had just lived through held little appeal. He made his way to a quiet corner where he could see the entire library, but feel somewhat hidden from view. He had just opened his calculus textbook when he heard familiar voices approaching. Sarah Martinez and two of her friends were setting up at a nearby table, apparently working on a group project for their government class. I still can't believe Marcus is back, one of her friends was saying. He looks so different. Amy, shush, Sarah said, glancing around nervously. I'm just saying, he used to be kind of shy and awkward, remember? Now he's all intense, and did you see what happened at lunch? Brad was being his usual jerk self, and Marcus I thought he was going to snap. He didn't snap, Sarah said firmly. He had a panic attack or something. It's probably normal for people coming back from war. How would you know what's normal? Amy asked. I looked it up, Sarah admitted. After Jake told me Marcus was coming back, I researched post-traumatic stress and veteran reintegration. A lot of soldiers have trouble adjusting to civilian life. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions hearing this conversation. Part of him was touched that Sarah had cared enough to research his potential struggles. Another part was embarrassed that his problems were being discussed by teenagers who meant well, but couldn't possibly understand. "Do you think he still likes you?" Amy's friend whispered. "Amy!" Sarah's voice was sharp with embarrassment. "What? You two were totally going to be a thing before he left. Everyone knew it. And now he's back, all mysterious and heroic." "He's not a character in a romance novel," Sarah said. "He's a real person who's been through real trauma. And even if he did have feelings for me before, that was 3 years ago. We're different people now." Marcus closed his textbook quietly and gathered his things, not wanting to hear any more of the conversation. As he stood to leave, Sarah noticed him and their eyes met across the library. Her face flushed red as she realized he might have overheard them talking about him. He gave her a small nod, not unfriendly, but not encouraging either, and headed for the exit. Mrs. Patterson stopped him on his way out. "Marcus, dear, one more thing. Principal Hayes wanted to see you before you left today. Just routine paperwork for returning students?" "I'm sure." The principal's office looked exactly the same as Marcus remembered, down to the motivational posters about reaching for excellence and the dusty fake plant in the corner. Principal Hayes was a thin, nervous man in his early 60s, who had always seemed more comfortable with budgets than with actual students. "Marcus, good to have you back, son. Good to have you back safe and sound." Hayes gestured to a chair across from his desk. "How was your first day? Everyone treating you well?" "Fine, sir," Marcus said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Good, good. Now, I'll be honest with you, Marcus. Your situation is unique. We've had students leave for the military before, but never one who came back as a decorated veteran of an interstellar war. The district wants to make sure we handle your reintegration properly." Marcus waited, sensing there was more coming. "The thing is," Hayes continued, fidgeting with a pen, "there's been some concern about how your presence might affect the other students. Not that you've done anything wrong, but your experiences are so far outside the normal teenage frame of reference that some parents are worried about." "Influence, I suppose." "What kind of influence?" Marcus asked. "Well, some parents are concerned that having a combat veteran in classes with their children might expose them to inappropriate stories or perspectives. Others worry that it might glamorize military service and encourage their kids to enlist before finishing college." Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest, but this time it was cold and controlled rather than the hot panic he had experienced at lunch. The soldier who returned from war. Part 4. Marcus's second day at Westfield High began differently. Instead of the nervous uncertainty that had plagued him the day before, he woke with a sense of purpose that reminded him of his military days. He had spent the evening researching the school's academic requirements and extracurricular activities, looking for opportunities to make a meaningful contribution rather than simply enduring his time there. The morning news was playing on his small television as he got ready, and the lead story made him pause. A transport ship carrying supplies to the Kepler system had been attacked by Zephyrian raiders, resulting in significant casualties among the civilian crew. The reporter mentioned that peace negotiations were ongoing, but attacks like this suggested the war was far from over. Marcus turned off the television and finished getting dressed. The war was continuing without him, which was both a relief and a source of unexpected guilt. His therapist had warned him about survivor's guilt and the feeling that he should still be out there with his unit instead of safe at home. Logically, he knew his service was complete and honorable, but emotions didn't always follow logic. At school, he noticed that word of his conversation with Principal Hayes had somehow spread. Students looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, as if he might at any moment launch into graphic descriptions of combat or try to recruit them for military service. The irony wasn't lost on him. In the military, he had been taught to protect civilians, and now civilians seemed to need protection from him. His first period advanced placement biology was taught by Dr. Miranda Vasquez, a young teacher who had started at Westfield while Marcus was deployed. She had a PhD in xenobiology and had actually worked on research related to Zephyrian physiology during the early stages of the war. "Today we're discussing evolutionary adaptations in extreme environments," Dr. Vasquez announced to the class. And we're fortunate to have someone with us who has actually observed an alien species in their natural habitat. Marcus felt 20 pairs of eyes turned toward him, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This was exactly the kind of attention Principal Hayes had warned him to avoid. "Dr. Vasquez," he said carefully, "I'm not sure that's appropriate classroom discussion." "Nonsense. This is science, not war stories. I'm interested in your observations about Zephyrian biological adaptations, from a purely academic perspective, of course." Marcus glanced around the classroom, seeing the eager faces of his classmates. Despite Principal Hayes' warnings, he realized this was an opportunity to share knowledge rather than trauma, to contribute something valuable to their education. Zephyrians evolved on a planet with much higher gravity than Earth. He began slowly. They're shorter than humans, but much more muscular. Their bone density is approximately 40% higher than ours, which makes them incredibly strong, but also more vulnerable to certain types of impact damage. Fascinating. What about their sensory adaptations? Their home planet has very little visible light, so they rely heavily on echolocation and electromagnetic sensitivity. They can detect electrical fields at a much lower threshold than humans, which made our early electronic equipment basically useless for stealth operations. Dr. Vasquez was taking notes enthusiastically, and Marcus could see several students doing the same. For the first time since returning to school, he felt like he was providing genuine value rather than being a curiosity or a problem to be managed. "One more question," Dr. Vasquez said. "Did you observe any cooperative behaviors that might suggest advanced social organization?" Marcus hesitated. This question touched on something more complex than biology, the recognition that the Zephyrians weren't monsters but rather an intelligent species with their own culture and social structures. "They're highly organized," he said finally. "Their military units operate with coordination that suggests sophisticated communication systems and strong social bonds. In some ways, they're not that different from us." The classroom fell silent at this observation. The official propaganda portrayed Zephyrians as aggressive aliens bent on humanity's destruction, but Marcus's comment suggested a more nuanced reality. After class, Dr. Vasquez approached him with obvious excitement. "Marcus, would you consider giving a guest lecture sometime? What you described challenges some assumptions in the current xenobiology literature. Your first-hand observations could be invaluable for research." "I'll think about it," Marcus said, though he was already imagining Principal Hayes' reaction to the idea. Lunchtime brought another encounter with Brad Hutchins, but this time, Marcus was prepared. Instead of sitting with his old friends, he had chosen a table near the windows where he could observe the cafeteria without feeling trapped. Brad approached with two of his teammates, their body language clearly indicating aggressive intent. Marcus recognized the pattern from the day before and felt his training kick in, not his military combat training, but the de-escalation techniques he had learned for dealing with civilian conflicts. Well, the war hero's back for round 2, Brad said, loud enough to attract attention from nearby tables. "Feeling better today? Yesterday you looked like you were about to cry." Marcus looked up calmly, his expression neutral. "Is there something you need, Brad? Just wondering if you're planning another breakdown today? Some of us are trying to eat lunch without the drama." Instead of rising to the bait, Marcus smiled slightly. "You know, Brad, yesterday I let you get under my skin because I wasn't sure how to handle civilian social dynamics after being away for so long. Today I realized something important." "Yeah? What's that?" "You're not actually angry at me. You're intimidated by what I represent, and you're trying to reassert your position in the local hierarchy by proving you can provoke a reaction from someone with combat experience." Marcus's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "It's actually a pretty normal psychological response." Brad's face flushed red and his teammates looked uncertain. They had clearly expected either submission or aggression, not psychological analysis delivered with clinical detachment. "You think you're so smart because you went off and played soldier?" Brad said, his voice rising. "I think I'm educated about human behavior under stress," Marcus replied. "And right now, you're displaying classic signs of threatened masculine identity in a social environment where your traditional dominance markers don't apply." A small crowd had gathered to watch the confrontation, and Marcus could hear suppressed laughter from some of the observers. Brad was being dissected and dismissed rather than fought, which was somehow more devastating to his ego than physical confrontation would have been. You want to see threatened masculinity? Brad stepped closer, his fists clenched. Marcus didn't move, but something in his eyes changed. The casual, analytical demeanor remained. But underneath it, everyone present could suddenly sense the presence of someone who had faced real violence and emerged victorious. It wasn't a threat. It was simply a reminder of reality. "Brad," Marcus said quietly, "I've killed people who were better trained, better equipped, and more dangerous than you'll ever be. I did it because it was my job and because they were trying to kill me. Do you really think I'm worried about a high school football player who's upset that I made him look foolish in front of his friends?" The silence that followed was complete. Brad stood frozen, apparently realizing that he had pushed the conversation into territory he wasn't prepared to handle. Finally, he stepped back, muttering something about Marcus being crazy, and retreated with his teammates. As the crowd dispersed, Marcus returned to his lunch, but he was aware that this confrontation would have consequences. He had successfully de-escalated a potentially violent situation without compromising his own dignity, but he had also revealed more of his lethal capabilities than Principal Hayes would approve of. "That was amazing," a voice said beside him. Marcus looked up to see Danny, the sophomore from his gym class the day before. "The way you shut him down without even raising your voice." "It's not amazing, Danny. It's just applied psychology and de-escalation training. The military teaches you to use minimum force necessary to resolve conflicts. Could you teach me that?" "I mean the psychology part, not the—" Danny gestured vaguely, apparently unwilling to say killing people out loud. Marcus studied the younger student's face, seeing genuine interest rather than morbid curiosity. "Why do you want to learn? Guys like Brad pick on kids like me all the time. I'm not big enough to fight them, and telling teachers just makes it worse." "But what you did, you made him back down without violence, and now everyone knows he's not as tough as he pretends to be." It was a fair point, and Marcus realized he had just been presented with a potential mission, helping other students develop the confidence and skills to handle bullying situations. It wasn't the kind of mission he had expected to find at high school, but it was meaningful work that only someone with his training and experience could provide. "I'll think about it," Marcus said, the same response he had given Dr. Vasquez about the guest lecture. The afternoon brought more evidence that his confrontation with Brad had shifted something in the school's social dynamics. Students who had seemed afraid of him the day before now looked at him with interest and respect. He had demonstrated that he could be dangerous when necessary, but preferred intellectual solutions to physical ones. In his final period English class, Ms. Chen had the students working in small groups to analyze different stories from the things they carried. Marcus found himself paired with Sarah Martinez and two other students he didn't know well. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Sarah said as they reviewed their assigned story, "about emotional truth versus factual truth. It makes me wonder what we're missing when we read about historical events. How much of what we think we know is just the official version, rather than what people actually experienced." "That's a sophisticated question," Marcus said. "Military history is full of examples where the official records don't capture what actually happened, either because the people writing the reports weren't there, or because they had political reasons to adjust the narrative." "Can you give us an example?" one of the other students asked. Marcus considered how to answer without violating Principal Hayes's guidelines about war stories. "Well, think about any major historical battle you've studied. The textbook probably tells you the date, the number of troops involved, who won, and what the strategic consequences were. But it probably doesn't tell you what the soldiers were thinking about while they waited for the battle to start, or how many of them were homesick, or scared, or worried about their families." "That's exactly what O'Brien is talking about," Sarah said, her eyes bright with understanding. "The human experience gets lost in the facts. Right, and sometimes the human experience is more important than the facts for understanding what really happened and why it mattered." Working with Sarah felt natural, in a way that surprised Marcus. Despite the years that had passed and the vast differences in their experiences, they still connected intellectually. She was clearly more mature than she had been as a 15-year-old, and her questions showed genuine curiosity about complex ideas rather than simple fascination with his military service. As the school day ended, Marcus reflected on how different this day had been from the first. He was beginning to see possibilities for meaningful engagement with his education and his classmates, despite the administrative concerns and social complications. Walking to his car, he passed Mr. Peterson working in the courtyard and stopped to say hello. "Heard you had an interesting lunch period," the janitor said with a slight smile. "News travels fast around here. Always has. You handled it well from what I heard. Sometimes you have to show people what you're capable of before they'll respect your choice not to use it. Principal Hayes won't. Be happy if he finds out." "Principal, Hayes is worried about liability and public relations. You're worried about figuring out how to live in this world. Those aren't always the same thing." Mr. Peterson paused in his work and looked directly at Marcus. "You figure out what your mission is yet?" Marcus thought about Dr. Vasquez's request for a guest lecture, Danny's interest in learning de-escalation techniques, and his productive conversation with Sarah about truth and storytelling. "I think I'm starting to," he said. The Soldier Who Returned from War. Part 5-2. Weeks into his return to Westfield High, Marcus had established new routines that felt more sustainable than his initial attempts to simply blend in. He arrived early each morning to help Mr. Peterson with maintenance tasks that required his enhanced strength, spent lunch periods in Dr. Vasquez's classroom discussing xenobiology research, and stayed after school to informally mentor students who sought his advice about conflict resolution. The arrangement with Danny had evolved into something more structured. The sophomore had convinced 3 other, frequently bullied students to join what they jokingly called Marcus's survival club, though Marcus insisted they focus on psychology and communication, rather than anything resembling military training. Remember, Marcus was explaining to the small group gathered in an empty classroom. Most bullies are operating from insecurity, not genuine confidence. They need to maintain their social position by demonstrating dominance over people they perceive as weaker. If you can disrupt that dynamic without direct confrontation, you remove their motivation. A quiet junior named Lisa raised her hand. "But what if they're bigger than you and they don't care about psychology? What if they just want to hurt you?" It was a fair question, and one that touched on the darker realities Marcus preferred not to discuss. "That's when you escalate to adult intervention," he said. "Teachers, parents, law enforcement if necessary. The techniques I'm teaching you are for social conflicts, not physical violence. But you could teach us to fight, couldn't you?" Danny asked. "I mean, you're trained for combat." "Danny, I'm not going to teach high school students military combat techniques. That would be inappropriate and dangerous. What I can teach you is how to recognize dangerous situations before they become violent, and how to de-escalate most conflicts through communication." After the session ended and the students left, Marcus remained in the classroom, reviewing homework for his calculus class. The mathematics felt almost meditative after years of tactical calculations and resource management. There was something comforting about problems that had clear, definitive solutions. He was interrupted by a knock on the door. Sarah Martinez stood in the doorway looking uncertain. "Hey," she said, "is this a bad time?" "Not at all. Come in." Marcus gestured to one of the empty desks. Sarah sat down but seemed to struggle with what she wanted to say. "I've been watching what you're doing with Danny and the others. It's really cool how you're helping them. They're good kids. They just needed some tools for dealing with difficult situations. I was wondering..." Sarah paused, then seemed to gather her courage. "Would you want to get coffee sometime? I mean, outside of school. Just to talk." The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to handle. 3 years ago, he would have been thrilled by such an offer from Sarah Martinez. Now he found himself hesitating. "Sarah, I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not?" Her voice was carefully neutral, but Marcus could detect disappointment underneath. "Because I'm not the same person I was when I left. I've seen things and done things that changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. I don't want to hurt you by pretending I'm someone I'm not." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, did it ever occur to you that I'm not the same person either? That 3 years of wondering if someone you cared about was alive or dead might have changed me too." The comment caught Marcus off guard. He had been so focused on his own transformation that he hadn't fully considered how his absence might have affected the people he left behind. "I researched PTSD and veteran reintegration because I wanted to understand what you might be going through," Sarah continued. "I know you're dealing with trauma and adjustment issues. I'm not asking you to pretend to be someone you're not. I'm asking if you'd like to have a conversation with someone who's thought about you almost every day for 3 years. Marcus looked at Sarah's face, seeing something there he hadn't noticed before, a maturity and determination that reminded him of some of the strongest people he had served with. She wasn't the teenage girl he remembered, any more than he was the teenage boy she remembered. Okay, he said finally. Coffee sounds good. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Principal Hayes, who looked flustered and slightly out of breath. Marcus, there you are. I need to speak with you immediately. Ms. Martinez, would you excuse us, please? Sarah gathered her things and left, giving Marcus a small smile that suggested their coffee date was still on despite the interruption. Marcus, I've received some concerning reports about your activities, Principal Hayes said once they were alone. Apparently, you've been conducting some sort of training sessions with students after school. I've been helping a few students with conflict resolution and communication skills, Marcus said carefully. That's not your job. You're here to complete your high school education, not to counsel other students. The district has liability concerns about unlicensed counseling, and some parents are worried about their children being influenced by military perspectives. Marcus felt the familiar anger building in his chest, but this time he channeled it into careful words rather than emotional reaction. Sir, with respect, these students came to me for help dealing with bullying and social conflicts. I've been teaching them basic psychology and de-escalation techniques, nothing more. I understand your intentions are good, but this has to stop. We can't have a student conducting unauthorized counseling sessions on school property. It sets a dangerous precedent and exposes the district to potential lawsuits. What if it wasn't unauthorized? Marcus asked. What do you mean? What if I worked with the school counseling department to formalize a peer mentoring program? We could develop appropriate protocols, get proper oversight, maybe even create curriculum that could help more students. Principal Hayes looked surprised by the suggestion. That's actually not a terrible idea, but it would require approval from the district, coordination with the counseling staff, and probably some form of training for you. I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to make it work properly. Let me make some calls, Hayes said, though he still looked skeptical. In the meantime, no more informal sessions. If you want to help these students, it needs to be done through official channels. After Principal Hayes left, Marcus remained in the classroom, frustrated, but not defeated. The encounter had clarified something important. If he wanted to make a meaningful difference at Westfield, he would need to work within the system rather than around it. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Sarah. Coffee tomorrow after school? There's a place called The Grind near the school. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, See you there at 4:09. The next day brought unexpected developments. During his morning biology class with Dr. Vasquez, she announced that she had submitted a proposal to the district's science department for Marcus to give a guest lecture about xenobiology based on his field observations. The response was very positive, she said after class. Apparently, your insights about Zephyrian physiology align with some recent research findings that haven't been widely distributed yet. They want to know if you'd be willing to present to multiple schools in the district. Marcus was both flattered and concerned. Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate the opportunity, but I need to be careful about what information I share. Some of my observations might involve classified intelligence. Of course, we would work with appropriate military liaisons to ensure everything you presented was cleared for public discussion. This could be a real contribution to scientific education, Marcus. By lunchtime, word had spread that Marcus might be giving official presentations about his war experiences. The reaction was mixed. Some students were excited about the possibility of first-hand accounts from the front lines, while others seemed nervous about more direct exposure to the realities of interstellar conflict. Marcus was eating lunch alone, deliberately avoiding the social complications of sitting with various groups, when he was approached by an unexpected visitor. Commander Elena Rodriguez, wearing civilian clothes but unmistakably military in her bearing, sat down across from him. Sergeant Chen, she said quietly. I'm Commander Rodriguez from the Veterans Affairs Liaison Office. May I join you? Of course, ma'am, Marcus said, automatically straightening his posture. At ease, Sergeant. I'm here unofficially. I've been hearing interesting reports about your reintegration activities here at Westfield. Teaching conflict resolution to high school students. consulting on xenobiology curriculum. You've been busy. Marcus waited, unsure whether he was in trouble or being commended. The thing is, Commander Rodriguez continued, we've been looking for ways to help veterans transition back to civilian life while still utilizing their unique skills and experiences. What you're doing here, finding ways to contribute to your community while managing your own adjustment. It's exactly the kind of model we'd like to encourage. I'm just trying to finish school and figure out what comes next. Ma'am, and you're doing it in a way that helps other people and demonstrates the positive impact veterans can have on civilian communities. That's valuable, Sergeant. More valuable than you might realize. Commander Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. How would you feel about participating in a pilot program? We're developing a veterans educational outreach initiative that would place qualified former service members in schools to provide mentorship and educational support. It would be a formal position with training, oversight, and compensation. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. What would that mean for my own education? You'd complete your high school requirements while also serving as a peer mentor and educational resource. Think of it as a work-study program with a military twist. And the liability issues? Principal Hayes has been concerned about unauthorized counseling and district policy. Those would be resolved through proper training and certification. You'd be working within established educational frameworks, not operating as a lone wolf. The offer was tempting, but Marcus had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. I'll need to think about it. Of course, take your time. But Marcus? Commander Rodriguez stood to leave. What you're doing here matters. You're showing other veterans that there are ways to serve your community, even after your military service ends. That's a valuable example. After she left, Marcus sat alone in the cafeteria, thinking about the unexpected turn his simple goal of finishing high school had taken. He had come back to Westfield hoping to recapture some sense of normalcy, but instead he seemed to be creating something entirely new. His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Danny and his small group of protégés, who had apparently been watching the conversation with Commander Rodriguez from across the cafeteria. Was that really a military officer? Danny asked, barely containing his excitement. Veterans Affairs Liaison, Marcus said, and before you ask, no, I can't tell you what we discussed. But it was about the program, wasn't it? About making it official? Marcus looked at the eager faces around him and realized that his informal mentoring had become important to these students in ways he hadn't fully appreciated. They weren't just learning conflict resolution techniques. They were gaining confidence and a sense that someone believed in their ability to handle difficult situations. We'll see, he said. But whatever happens, remember that the most important thing I can teach you is that you already have the tools to solve most of your problems. You just need to learn how to use them. As the bell rang and students headed to their afternoon classes, Marcus remained at his table for a moment longer, thinking about Commander Rodriguez's offer and his upcoming coffee date with Sarah. His mission at Westfield was becoming clearer, but it was also becoming more complex than he had anticipated. Change, it seemed, was the one constant in both military and civilian life. The Soldier Who Returned from War, Part 6. The Grind was a small coffee shop that had opened while Marcus was deployed, occupying what used to be a used bookstore on Maple Street. The interior was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the kind of comfortable chaos that suggested it was more about community than profit. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early, a habit from his military days, and chose a table near the back where he could observe the entrance while maintaining privacy for conversation. He ordered black coffee and waited, using the time to prepare himself mentally for what might be a difficult discussion. Sarah arrived exactly on time, looking nervous but determined. She had changed out of her school clothes into jeans and a sweater that made her look more like the teenager Marcus remembered, though her eyes still held the maturity he had noticed in their recent conversations. "Thanks for coming," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would," Marcus replied simply. Sarah ordered a complicated drink involving multiple types of milk and flavoring, then sat back and studied Marcus's face. "You look tired," she said. "Been a busy few weeks. I heard about the Veterans Affairs officer visiting you at school. Is everything okay?" Marcus was surprised by how quickly word had traveled, though he supposed he shouldn't have been. High school gossip networks were remarkably efficient. "Everything's fine. Just discussing some opportunities. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks and adjusting to being alone together for the first time since Marcus's return. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about why I wanted to have coffee with you." Marcus waited, recognizing the tone of someone preparing to share something difficult. "When you left for the military, I was angry," Sarah continued. "Not at you specifically, but at the situation. I felt like you were running away from everything here, from your life, from me. I know we were never officially together, but there was something between us, wasn't there?" "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "There was. I spent the first year after you left telling myself I was glad you were gone, that you had chosen the military over me, over your future here. It was easier than admitting how scared I was that you might not come back." Marcus could see tears forming in Sarah's eyes, and he felt the familiar helplessness that came with witnessing someone else's pain without being able to fix it. "Then the casualty reports started coming in," Sarah said. "Not specific names, but numbers. Hundreds of soldiers killed or wounded in battles whose names I couldn't even pronounce. And I realized that my anger was just a way of avoiding the fact that I might lose you before I ever had the chance to tell you how I felt." "Sarah, let me finish, please." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I started researching everything I could about the war, about the places you might be stationed, about what soldiers experienced. Not because I was obsessed, but because it was the only way I could feel connected to you." Marcus thought about his own letters home, which had been infrequent and carefully censored to avoid worrying his family. He had no idea that Sarah had been following his potential experiences so closely. "When Jake told me you were coming back to school, I was terrified," Sarah continued, "because I knew you would be different and I wasn't sure if there would still be room in your life for the feelings we used to have." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I realize that I'm different too. The girl who was angry at you for leaving doesn't exist anymore. The person I am now understands why you made the choice you did, and I respect it. But I also need to know if there's a possibility for something between the people we are now, not the people we used to be." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his response carefully. Sarah deserved honesty even if it was painful. "Sarah, I care about you. I always have. But I need you to understand something about what the war did to me." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've killed people. I've watched friends die. I've made decisions that saved lives and decisions that cost lives. Those experiences don't just go away because I'm back in a safe environment." "I know," Sarah said. "I've read about PTSD and moral injury and all the things that can happen to people in combat. I'm not expecting you to be the same person you were before." "It's not just about trauma," Marcus said. "It's about fundamental changes in how I see the world, how I process relationships, how I evaluate what's important. The person I was at 17 was worried about asking girls to dances and getting into college. The person I am now has killed sentient beings and had to make peace with that reality." Sarah reached across the table and touched his hand gently. "Marcus, do you think you're the only person who's changed? Do you think losing my brother to a drunk driver 2 years ago didn't change how I see the world? Do you think watching my parents' marriage fall apart because they couldn't handle their grief didn't affect how I process relationships?" Marcus stared at her, shocked. "Sarah, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. How could you know? You were fighting a war on another planet." She squeezed his hand. "My point is that we've both been through things that changed us. We're both dealing with experiences that most people our age never have to face. Maybe that's something we can understand about each other." They talked for another hour, sharing stories and experiences that filled in the gaps of their separate journeys over the past 3 years. Sarah told him about her brother's death and her parents' subsequent divorce, about how she had thrown herself into academic achievement as a way of coping with loss. Marcus shared some of his own struggles with reintegration, the nightmares and flashbacks, the difficulty of relating to people who had never faced life or death situations. "So where does this leave us?" Sarah asked as they prepared to leave. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I know I'd like to spend more time with you, to see if there's something real between the people we are now. But I need you to understand that I'm still figuring out who that person is." "That's okay," Sarah said. "I'm still figuring out who I am too." As they walked back toward the school parking lot, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since returning home. The possibility of a future that included personal happiness alongside his sense of mission and duty. The Next morning brought new developments at school. Principal Hayes approached Marcus before first period with news about the peer mentoring program. The district has approved a pilot program, Hayes said, clearly surprised by the speed of the decision. Apparently, your Veterans Affairs contact has some influence at the administrative level. They want to start with a formal structure next semester, but they're willing to let you begin training immediately. What kind of training? Marcus asked. Conflict resolution certification, peer counseling basics, crisis intervention protocols. It's a 6-week program that you can complete while maintaining your regular class schedule. Interested? Marcus thought about Danny and the other students who had been coming to him for help, about the formal structure that would allow him to help even more students while protecting the school district from liability concerns. Very interested, he said. During lunch, he shared the news with his informal mentoring group, who were thrilled at the prospect of the program becoming official and expanding to help more students. Does this mean you'll be like a real counselor? Lisa asked. More like a peer mentor with specialized training, Marcus explained. I'll be able to help students with conflict resolution and social issues, but I'll also have proper oversight and support from the professional counseling staff. That's so cool, Danny said. You're going to help so many people. Marcus was touched by their enthusiasm, but also aware of the responsibility that came with formalizing his role. He would need to be more careful about maintaining professional boundaries while still providing the kind of authentic support that had made his informal sessions effective. His afternoon classes were interrupted by an announcement from Principal Hayes requesting that all students report to the auditorium for a special assembly. Marcus joined the stream of confused students making their way to the large gathering space. The assembly turned out to be a presentation by a representative from the Terran Defense Force Recruitment Office, discussing opportunities for military service and the importance of defending human colonies from alien threats. The presenter, a polished young officer, spoke in broad terms about honor, duty, and the exciting career opportunities available in the expanding human military. Marcus watched the presentation with growing discomfort. The recruitment pitch focused on adventure and heroism, while glossing over the realities of combat and the psychological costs of military service. Several students were clearly intrigued by the glamorous portrayal of military life, and Marcus could see them beginning to romanticize the experience he had worked so hard to survive. During the question and answer session, a student asked about the likelihood of seeing combat duty. The recruiter's answer was carefully optimistic, suggesting that most military personnel served in support roles, and that combat exposure was limited to volunteers for special assignments. Marcus knew this was misleading at best. The Kepler conflict had required The Soldier Who Returned from War, Part 7. The consequences of Marcus's confrontation with the military recruiter came swiftly. Within 24 hours, he was called to 3 separate meetings, one with Principal Hayes, one with the district superintendent, and one with Commander Rodriguez from Veterans Affairs. Each meeting brought different perspectives on what he had done and what it meant for his future. Principal Hayes was predictably upset. Marcus, I understand your concerns about recruitment practices, but disrupting an official school assembly was completely inappropriate. The district is receiving complaints from parents who think you were undermining our relationship with the military, and others who think we shouldn't have allowed the recruitment presentation in the first place. I'm sorry for the disruption, sir, but I'm not sorry for what I said. Those students deserve to hear the complete truth about military service. That may be, but there are proper channels for addressing concerns about recruitment practices. Standing up in an auditorium full of teenagers and describing combat trauma isn't one of them. The meeting with Superintendent Williams was more complex. She was a former teacher who had worked her way up through the district administration and seemed genuinely interested in understanding Marcus's perspective. Sergeant Chen, I've reviewed the transcript of your comments during the assembly, she said. While your method was unorthodox, your concerns about incomplete recruitment information are valid. The question is how we move forward from here. Ma'am, I just want to finish my education and help other students where I can. I don't want to be a source of ongoing controversy. Unfortunately, you've become exactly that, Superintendent Williams said. We're receiving pressure from both sides. Military liaison offices who feel you undermined their recruitment efforts, and parent groups who want more transparency about the realities of military service. Your comments have started a much larger conversation about how we handle military recruitment in our schools. The meeting with Commander Rodriguez was the most surprising. Instead of reprimanding Marcus for his public comments, she seemed almost pleased. "Sergeant Chen, what you did was politically unwise but morally sound," she said. "The recruitment